Hey, everyone. Welcome into another exciting episode of the Easter Pod. This is episode 7, which is incredible, and I'm really pumped that you are listening to this episode because on today's show, we talk with Suzi Lantz. Suzi is a longtime friend. She is a wife, a mother. She has an incredible family. They are very near and dear to my heart. Even though we are not blood related, her family has always felt like a part of my family. And so I was very excited to be able to talk with Suzi. Suzi, professionally, is a senior consultant at GiANT, and we will talk more about what that means and what she does in her work coaching leaders through GiANT. And in addition to that, she's also a cross-country coach at Oakwood Middle School. And Suzi and Jason also planted a church called Love Canton, which is how we originally met. And Jason, Suzi's husband, is now the senior visionary leader at River Tree Christian Church, which has about 6 campuses, I believe, around Ohio. And I actually used to work for River Tree, so there's a lot of overlap and a lot of connection between myself and Suzi and her husband Jason and their family. So all that to say, it was really a treat to be able to connect with her on today's episode. As I mentioned, Suzi and I talked about her role with GiANT as a leadership coach, working with leaders across a variety of industries, and we talked about what being a healthy leader looks like and what it means to know yourself to lead yourself, which is an axiom that they use a lot in GiANT as a company, and it's an axiom that I found very helpful for myself over the years to kind of help guide me through some of the leadership stuff I've been a part of, and some of the tools Suzi has found to be transformative in her own leadership journey and in working with leaders. We cover a few of those, so you definitely won't want to miss that. And we also deep dive on some stuff like, why is it so easy for us as people to always compare ourselves to one another? And what do we do with a deep sense of fear if we feel like it's paralyzing us and stopping us from moving forward and what it is that we want to accomplish? So overall, we covered some really exciting and insightful and in-depth topics that I found our discussion really helpful to me personally, and I think that you will get a lot out of it as well. As always, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Easter Pod and offer up a quick reminder that if you're liking the show, if you're digging the conversations we're having and some of the content we're putting out, that be sure to follow the Easter Pod on social media across all platforms, and be sure to give the show a rating, leave a review, and definitely subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now, in a prior episode, I had introduced a segment called Easter Island because I love coming up with fun and quirky segments that are wordplay on my last name. That's why it's called the Easter Pod, not because I'm vain, but because my last name's Easterday and Easter Pod just sounded fun. And that's why we have a segment like Easter Island. But Easter Island, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it or didn't hear about it in our past episode, is basically just a place where we go, and it's an excuse for me to talk about something I'm interested in or thinking about that maybe has absolutely nothing to do with our guest or the topic we're talking about for the show. So it's another segment I came up with. It's just a way for me to discuss things like my top 10 episodes of The Office, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So if you're not interested in The Office as a show, if you're not interested in my top 10 list, feel free to skip ahead to our conversation with Suzi. And I understand that I am not unique in listing out my top 10 episodes of The Office. I know that it is an incredibly popular show for a reason, and you have stuff like the Office Ladies podcast with Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey that they recently started doing, where they're week by week going through each episode of The Office in chronological order and giving some incredible information from behind the scenes and talking to cast members and writers and directors, which, as an aside, if you haven't checked out the Office Ladies pod yet, definitely be sure to do so. It's incredible. You have things like Shea Serrano, which is a writer I've mentioned on the show before, somebody whose work I love and somebody who I admire just in general. He came out with a PDF, so not a book, a PDF called Conference Room 5 Minutes, where it was, I think it was 10 illustrated essays about The Office. So if you haven't actually bought that either, since we're all kind of quarantined and maybe a few of you have some extra free time, I definitely recommend looking up Conference Room 5 Minutes. It's an incredible set of illustrated essays about The Office. That came out, I want to say, last year, and I breezed through it because The Office is one of my all-time favorite shows, easily in the top 3 shows for me all time. And I thought about doing this segment where I go over my top 10 episodes of The Office for a couple reasons. The first being that I'm on probably what is my, 25th rewatch of the entire series. That's probably a conservative estimate. I've seen The Office and all its episodes all the way through, like I said, at least 25 times, but that's probably a low number. But not only am I on a rewatch, I also, last night, attended a virtual murder mystery party through Zoom, as many of us are doing these days, finding ways to connect online as we're quarantined. And there was a lot of quoting of season 6, episode 10, I believe. You can fact check me on that. I think that's when The Office did their murder mystery episode. So we were quoting that episode a lot, and that made me think of wanting to do this as well. And I said there are only 2 reasons. There's a third. The third reason I thought about doing this is because probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was a contributing writer for a website called statelines.com that was started by a friend and was in the spirit of something like The Ringer or Grantland, where we would write about sports and pop culture and all that kind of stuff. And I wrote an article in 2013, which was the last year that The Office was on the air. I wrote an article to commemorate it about my top 10 favorite episodes of The Office. However, unfortunately, when I tried to reference that article in preparation for this episode, I realized that I could not find the article online anymore. Hopefully it exists out there somewhere, but since I was unable to locate it, I thought, well, okay, I want to record this intro, I want to have some fun, help some people maybe take their mind off the quarantine for a little bit, and even though I keep bringing it up, and I started a top 5. I said, okay, I'll put together just a quick top 5 of my favorite episodes of The Office. However, as I started going through Wikipedia for just to get the episode numbers and details and put together the list, I realized that there are too many great and incredible episodes of The Office. So I ended up putting together a quick top 10 anyway with a few honorable mentions. And I'm going to breeze through a few of them and kind of try and focus a little bit more on the top 5. So it goes without saying, if you've never seen The Office before, first of all, what are you doing with your life? It's a show literally for everybody. It's incredible. There's a lot of stuff in there, albeit that hasn't aged well. And if you've seen the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But overall, it still remains one of the best directed, best written, best acted comedy shows, stands the test of time. It's going to be an incredible show for the rest of eternity. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. But spoiler warning, so you've been warned. All right, without any further ado, let's jump into the top 10 episodes of The Office according to Corey Easterday. And I tried to rank these not just in order of what episodes were most meaningful to me or the ones I enjoyed the most. I tried to be as objective as possible, but here we go. Number 10, I had season 4. This was a 2-parter. This was season 4, episodes 1 and 2, and it was titled Fun Run. And in Fun Run, the short synopsis is Michael hits Meredith with his car. Michael feels bad and like everything is cursed. Michael holds a race for Meredith because when she's in the hospital, they think that she has contracted rabies or she gets tested for rabies. And Michael decides, I can make everyone like me again and make this up to her by holding a charity race for a disease that has, as they say, largely been eradicated in the United States and in the world. So that was number 10, Fun Run. And I should say, I'm actually not reading from anything but my lists as I come up with these descriptions. Any synopsis I give of an episode is completely from memory and off the top of my head. So that was definitely a way for me to flex my unending knowledge of The Office. So there you go. Number 9, season 1, episode 5, basketball. And this is a really fun one. It's one where Michael decides to host a game of pickup basketball down in the warehouse, and it's the office employees versus the warehouse workers. And I actually just watched a video from The Ringer, speaking of The Ringer, that was on YouTube you should check out, where they break down the basketball game, and Shea Serrano does this actually in Conference Room 5 Minutes, so I won't do it here. I don't want to steal content, but they break down the basketball game and have a top 10 list of the players and how everyone performed, and just really, really get into it. It's really fun, so you should check those things out. But number 9, Season 1, Episode 5, basketball. Number 8 is a tie between two episodes. Both are in Season 9. And a lot of people that are just casual fans of The Office will tell you that they kind of stopped watching in real time after Steve Carell left the show, which was, we will get to that very soon, but that was in Season 7. And anytime somebody says that, I really feel bad for them because I think they're missing out. Granted, Seasons 8 and 9, I don't think hold the best episodes of the show. That's why they're not on my list a lot or in my honorable mentions a lot, but there are some really good episodes in there. And this one in particular, or the two, I should say, in particular, Season 9, Episode 22, AARM, Assistant to the Assistant Regional Manager, and the finale, the series finale of The Office, Season 9, Episode 23. And the reason I have them in my top 10 is not just because of the way I felt that everyone just completed the show in such an incredible way, and all the character reunions and all the tying of the loose ends with the storylines, all of that was incredible. The word fan service gets used a lot, and I'm not a fan of that word, but I felt like the writers and cast of The Office did a good job paying off everything they had building up to over the previous episodes and seasons. But there were so many touching emotional moments that when these episodes originally aired, I found myself coming to tears a lot during both episodes, both out of joy, out of sadness, and out of hopefulness. And that just shows you right there my emotional connection to The Office. Number 7, Season 7, Episode 22, Goodbye Michael, was directed by Paul Feig, who has a lot of episodes on this list that he directed. And this one made the list because we are sending off the character of Michael Scott, who was the foundation of the show, is what the thing that people first think about in many cases when they think of The Office. And it was just a really emotional and well-written episode, and I felt like it did his character a lot of justice in sending him off. And talked about spoilers, obviously, in the previous episodes we just mentioned, one of the things that makes them so good is his reappearance at the end of the series, where he is Dwight's best man, and Jim surprises Dwight with that because Dwight had originally named Jim his best man, so that whole storyline was incredible. But number 7, Goodbye Michael. Number 6, Season 3, Episode 16, Phyllis's Wedding. And this one made the list because of just how many memorable moments there are in it. It's the one I remember when I first saw it, just laughing uproariously the entire time at all of the hijinks and Michael's inability to let anyone else have anything be about them. It's all about him, all about his narcissism, all about him redeeming bad experiences in his childhood and having the wedding of his dreams, even though it's Phyllis's wedding. And one of the famous quotes from that episode that I always find myself really tempted to quote at weddings is when the priest, the pastor, says, I forget which character goes first, but basically something to the effect of, Phyllis, do you take Bob to be your lawfully wedded husband? She says, I do. And then Michael Scott jumps out from his place amongst the groomsmen and says, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time as a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Bob Vance. And the room is dead silent. And then the priest goes, Bob, do you take Phyllis to be your wife? And Michael's like, oh, shoot. And then he jumps out and does it again. Everyone blows up in applause. That's just one of the incredible moments from that episode. So number 6, Phyllis's Wedding. Number 5, we have Season 7, Episode 17, Threat Level Midnight, which aired in February of 2011. And this is the infamous episode where we finally get to see Michael's script for his movie Threat Level Midnight, starring Michael Scarn, that we had been introduced to in a earlier season of The Office. We finally get to see it played out. He made his movie, and we get to watch that movie, and it is incredible. Number 5, Threat Level Midnight. Number 4 is another two-parter, and it was in Season 6, Episodes 4 and 5, titled Niagara, directed again by the wonderful, infamous Paul Feig. And this one pops up so high on the list because not only is it Pam and Jim's wedding, but again, you get to see these cast of characters that by this point we become so attached to and love so much. You get to see them celebrate the anchor point of the show. I said earlier, when people think of The Office, they think of Michael Scott, but tied for first in that is the love story of Pam and Jim. And Jenna Fischer's even talked about on the Office Ladies podcast how that story of Pam and Jim is the through line through the series, that so many of the people working on the show viewed it as being about Pam and Jim, and then all these things were happening around them. So this episode culminates a lot of their story arc, but hijinks ensue. There's, Kevin Malone, his shoes stink so bad that the hotel throws them away, so he has to wear Kleenex boxes on his feet with his toupee. On and on. There's just so much incredible stuff in Season 6, Episodes 4 and 5, Niagara, so that's why it cracks the top 5 for sure. Number 3 is Season 2, Episode 1, The Dundies. And The Dundies is an absolutely iconic episode for so many reasons. Michael hosts their annual office party, The Dundies, at Chili's, and he does all sorts of impressions, and all the people eating at Chili's are heckling him and giving him weird looks, and none of his jokes are funny. And Oscar in that episode describes it as like attending a child's birthday party where the child's having fun and everyone else, all the adults, just pretend to have fun. Just an iconic episode that really set the tone for the entire show of the ceiling for how awkward and cringeworthy and hilarious the Michael Scott character could be. So number 3 is The Dundies. Number 2, this one is always hard for me to watch because of how cringeworthy it is. Number 2 is Season 6, Episode 12, Scott's Tots, actually directed by BJ Novak, aka Ryan the Temp. And in Scott's Tots, Michael Scott, 10 years ago, in the timeline of this episode, so 10 years prior, promised a bunch of third graders that he would pay for their college tuition if they graduated high school. And now the reckoning has come. The time has come for him to pay up. He doesn't have the money to buy their college tuition or really do anything to help them. And he goes to the school to try and break the news. And the kids have this elaborate show put together for him with singing and dancing and thanking him and just pouring him with all this praise. And then he has to get up there and he's like, you know what's more valuable than tuition? Intuition. Intuition means knowing when something bad is about to happen. Do any of you have intuition? Know what's going to happen next? No? You're going to make me say it? Okay. Then he breaks the news and he tries to redeem himself by saying, okay, online courses are a viable option and everyone needs a laptop computer to do that. So he reaches into his book bag and they think he's going to hand out these laptop computers, and nope, he hands them out. I think he says something like, and you can't use a computer without a laptop battery, and he pulls out all these laptop battery packs and they start to boo him, and it was a hilarious episode, but it's so cringeworthy. So number 2, Season 6, Episode 12, Scott's Tots, which brings us to number 1. And this was actually tied between Scott's Tots and this one for number 1. But number 1 Office episode all time, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of people, is Season 4, Episode 13, Dinner Party. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Dinner Party. Also directed by Paul Feig. Dinner Party chronicles a awkward and horrible and miserable and hilarious evening where the office is made to think that there's an assignment from corporate where they have to stay late and work late. And we basically come to find out that was all a ruse from Michael because he had been trying to get Jim and Pam to come over to have dinner with him and Jan for months. So he trapped them in this lie that there's a late night assignment, convinces Jim, gets to Jim and says, well, what are your plans? And he's like, I didn't make any plans because we have to work. And then Michael pretends to get on the horn with corporate and nix the whole assignment. And then he's like, so Jim, what are you doing? He's like, well, and then Michael's like, you said you had no plans. And so he basically traps Jim and Pam. They come over. Andy and Angela are a couple at that time. So they come over for the dinner party. And it is, as Jim describes in the episode, basically, or maybe it was Pam, but it's a competition between Michael and Jan to just see how uncomfortable they can make their guests. And they are both winning, and they try to play charades, and that goes haywire. The dinner's not even ready for another few hours. Michael and Jan are just arguing with each other and trying to have this false positive attitude. We find out that Michael sleeps on just a little tiny space, doesn't even sleep in the bed, just all sorts of crazy, hilarious, cringeworthy stuff. So that's why it's number 1, season 4, episode 13, Dinner Party. And I'm not going to go through the honorable mentions because I'm already running longer than I wanted to, but I will say, let me know what you think of the list. Reach out on social media, find us at the Easter Pod, find me, Corey Easterday. Let me know what you think of this top 10 list of The Office. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Let me know what your favorite episode is. What do you think's number 1? Okay, so thank you for listening to that. Thank you for humoring me. Just wanted to have some fun as we're all cooped up. And again, as a reminder, be sure to check out Suzi Lantz. You can find her work on LinkedIn. Find Suzi on LinkedIn. Go to giantworldwide.com. Go to giant.tv/start/Suzi Lantz for free access to some of Giant's content. We've linked to all this in the show notes, so be sure to check it out. Also, check out Giant's Liberator podcast. I listen to it. It's hosted by the 2 founders of Giant, and it's really great. So be well, stay safe, continue doing inspirational things to help each other and connect with each other. And without further ado, my conversation with Suzi Lantz. All right, well, I am very excited, which is an understatement, to have Suzi Lantz joining me on the Easter Pod today. Suzi and her husband Jason and their 2 kids are people who have felt like a part of my family for a very long time, even though we aren't related by blood. So it's definitely a treat to be able to chat with her today. Suzi especially has always been one of those friends who constantly cheers you on, as many people that know her will attest, and she definitely makes you feel like you can conquer the world. So I think it's very fitting that is pretty much what she does for a living. So Suzi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. In the midst of all the craziness, I've been trying to wake up in the morning and, just ground myself and have joy. And even if it's in simple things like an incredible cup of coffee. I'm doing really well today, Corey. Thanks for having me on this podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for coming on. I definitely feel it with the coffee. That has been very revitalizing in this time of self-isolation. And speaking of, I know that your whole family are very social creatures. So I was just wondering how everyone's doing with the whole social distancing thing right now. How are you coping?
Well, our household is kind of right down the middle when it comes to introverts and extroverts. We are all social. But Karis, my daughter, and I are definitely introverts. We recharge by being alone, finding some safe, quiet space, where the boys in our household, Jason, my husband, and JJ, are massive, extreme extroverts who need people. So Karis and I are living our best lives right now, and JJ and Jason are really struggling. By the end of the day, the 2 of them are just they're hurting. They need people in their lives, and it's going to be a testing season for the 2 of them. But thank goodness we have all these virtual tools and Zoom and FaceTime and Marco Polo. Those things have been their lifelines for sure.
I can definitely relate probably more to Jason and JJ, and I too am thankful for the virtual tools because it allows us to do to record this podcast like we're doing right now. So, uh, well, thank you again so much for coming on. To get us started in our conversation, I just thought it would be fun to take a brief trip down memory lane and provide some context for how we know each other. If I remember correctly, I first met you and Jason as a student at Malone University in 2010, so a decade ago, which is crazy to say. And I think we first met, I had some general awareness of you both and what you were doing in the community, but we didn't actually meet until we were at a mutual friend's wedding together and randomly sat by each other. And I got to learn more about a church you had just planted called Love Canton. And why don't you take the story from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were sitting in the corner. I didn't know anybody at that wedding. And so I was trying to hide out, and it was great. We got to sit next to you and hear all about what your life was about and who you were. And yeah, our church plant, Love Canton, it really started because we just had a heart for the people in our city. Canton, Ohio, there was, it was right around 2007 and 2008, where if you remember that brief stint in our nation's history, we were in an economic collapse and there was just a lot of turmoil going on. And it was in that time that we really found ourselves in the city with a group of people like you who just had a heart to serve. And it became just an incredible experience. We watched a family form because it really became not just us serving them, but definitely a we approach. And so, it was during that season that we watched you gain a heart to help people do their laundry who wouldn't be able to afford it. And such a simple idea. You were just this college student with this massive heart, tons of ideas, and just needed that little nudge to say, go for it, Corey, do it, collect those quarters. And we watched people like you who had a great idea actually, be able to see those ideas come into fruition in very tangible ways to serve a city in need. But at the same time, you were able to invite people who maybe were living in poverty or, financial poverty, but had spiritual riches and emotional and just friendship to offer. We were able to invite people to give what they had. And in the, in the whole experience, I just felt like, God, we saw so many cool things. We watched people step up to serve, to be the church, to really listen to, where they could be part of the solution. And it was incredible. So that's just a little bit about, how our stories intersected. And I feel like I got to watch you grow up. Some of that angst in college and what am I going to do? Who am I going to marry? Will I always be alone? It was always there. And it's been so fun to watch your story unfold, Corey.
Oh, wow. I really appreciate you sharing all that. And I appreciate you saying that. And I'm very grateful to you and Jason, as I've expressed many, many times over the last 10 years, for the role that not only you played for me, especially in those early years, but have played for me in subsequent years since. And the marriage and all that conversation. Luckily, I met my incredible wife, Megan, very soon after those conversations. So that was kind of a moot point. We don't need to get into that, I guess. Yeah,
you can edit it out.
Oh no, I'll leave it in. Typical college angst about, who am I going to spend the rest of my life with, and all that kind of stuff. So I get it, but it brings up an interesting question. You and Jason, because of your role with Love Canton and everything you just described, have interacted with a lot of young leaders in the last 10 years, especially, and before that, obviously. What's it been like? You reference kind of where our stories intersect. What's it been like to see other leaders and other people that maybe you met around 2010 or shortly thereafter? What's it been like to see their journeys of growth over such a long period of time?
I think there's nothing better in life than to get to invest in people, just see who they are. And I think that's with my wiring and personality, that's one of the things that I feel like I just see people. I see who they can be. And it is one of the greatest gifts of my life to watch people blossom into who they are. And often, it's hard when you're, coaching somebody or mentoring them because without pitfalls, without failure, we don't grow. And it's difficult sometimes to watch people you care about and are completely for struggle. But on the flip side, you watch them grow and learn life lessons, and then make decisions that really posture them to be who they are, to live out the purpose that they are meant for. And there really is nothing better, honestly. In GiANT, we use our leadership analogy is that of the Sherpa. And so for all those mountain climbers out there, you might get that analogy. But when you climb a mountain, particularly big ones like Everest or K2 or Cotopaxi, you've got to have a guide. And those guides are called Sherpas. Sherpas are people group. They're a people group that literally are born at 14,000 foot elevation. So their bodies are acclimatized to mountain climb. And so within a course of their life, they'll climb up and down a mountain over 100 times. But they're uniquely equipped to lead other people up the mountain. And so when they're climbing, they're thinking about who their team is that they're trying to get up the mountain. And when they get to the top, they are so excited to celebrate not their own victory, but their teams. And I think when I look back on my leadership journey, you have to go first. You have to make that own mountain climb, and it's tough just to gain skills and knowledge and experience. But then once you possess that, there's really nothing better in life than to take somebody else up that mountain and to really celebrate them when they make it to the top, or even midway up the mountain, to really just be for them and to be excited. It really is, I think, the purpose of life, and it makes such a difference. So yeah, to answer your question, there's nothing better to watch people who you've seen over a decade just become who they're meant to be, and to cheer them on in their success.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad you brought up GiANT, because your primary work that you do right now, in addition to many awesome things that you do, is as a senior consultant for GiANT. So for those who don't know, can you describe what GiANT is and what your role with GiANT looks like?
Yeah. So GiANT they're a media and content company that really helps leaders become leaders worth following, who know how to build leaders worth following, who then lead organizations that everybody wants to work for. And, at GiANT, what I do, I get the unique privilege of consulting with companies, large or small, business leaders, to really assess their overall health of their culture. We use tools like a diagnostic 360 to really see where their culture lies. Some cultures, are healthy and they just need a tweak, but there's other cultures within a working environment that are actually pretty toxic. And it's important for a leader to identify that and then begin to actually pinpoint what's causing our culture to be toxic. Is it a lack of alignment? Do people not really know or have clarity about what we're doing and what we're all about, what our values are? Sometimes it's a breakdown in relationships where there's just not trust. People do not trust their superiors, or they don't trust their peers. And so it becomes just these small little toxins that get introduced into the environment that can really take down the productivity of a company, of a culture. Often it's communication. People just aren't aware of what it's like to be on the other side of them. And so there's a lack of communication that's getting translated. And that can all, just cause, a halt in execution and productivity that can be very frustrating to the leaders. So what I get to do is come in and do some assessment. And then based on that, GiANT has equipped me and, whoever works with them with so many great tools and resources. We have a great platform that helps, really everyone grow and develop, like I said, to be a leader worth following, not just a leader people have to follow. There's a huge difference there. So yeah, just a little bit about what I get to do. I do one-on-one coaching and workshops. I do team intensives and personal intensives. But we really work to customize solutions to help figure out what is the pain point, and then what can we do to come alongside those leaders and those companies, those organizations that need help.
Yeah, and you're right. There is a huge difference between being a leader that people have to follow and a leader that people want to follow. And so I have the benefit of having been introduced to GiANT when I was working at River Tree, which is the church that you and your husband, Jason, are a part of. What is Jason's official title at River Tree?
He is the senior visionary leader. So there's 6 campuses right now within River Tree, and Jason really looks out over the overall vision. He, makes sure all of those churches are healthy. he still speaks and preaches, but yeah, he's really responsible for the vision overall of that church movement.
So he brought GiANT. He was the catalyst, if I'm not mistaken, for bringing GiANT and connecting GiANT and what they do into River Tree. And that's why I was introduced to GiANT. And I just love everything GiANT has to offer. I am actually, because I am very nerdy and I love listening to 100 different podcasts, I am even a regular listener to the Liberator podcast, which is the podcast that Jeremy Kubicek and Steve Cockram, who, what is their official role within GiANT?
They are the co-founders of GiANT.
They have a lot of incredible tools and language that they use that you have described already. So I'm 100% sold on everything that GiANT does. Do you have a favorite tool from GiANT as you talk about tools and resources? Do you have a favorite one that you use in your work with leaders? And if so, why is it your favorite?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's two, I would say. The first, I'm not going to go into, we can find, and I'm going to give all your listeners a link that they could access all of our content. But the Support Challenge Matrix is a great one. But I would say my most favorite is a tool we call the influence model. That one really allows a person to look at themselves in the mirror and say, what's getting in my way from really forming not just transactional relationships, but actually meaningful relationships that have impact and influence. Because those are the type of relationships, whether it's with a client, a friend, a spouse, that you really want to gain. And it takes knowing yourself to lead yourself. It takes lowering your walls of self-preservation. And so the influence model tool really looks at that, because all of us have different filters when we're coming into, a new relationship with a person. So let's say I just met you, Corey. I immediately have filters that I'm looking for you to pass through. Those filters, as the tool unpacks, and I won't explain it all, but are character, chemistry, competence, and credibility. And so as we're interacting, I'm looking to see, is this person of character? Can I trust them? The chemistry part is, do I like them? Could we go hang out, go bowling when the bowling alleys open up again? But could we hang out? Would he be a great person to just spend time with? Would I want him in my life? Would I want my kids to know him? The competence piece, does he have anything to add to my skills? Can he, really, does he know what he's talking about? And then the credibility piece is he willing to listen to where my pain lies so that he can take the competence and the skill set he has and match them to actually meet a need that I have? And that credibility is so important if we really want to have influence in a lasting, relationship with a person. And so I just love the way that particular tool breaks things down, because it simply allows us to see some blind spots in our life as we interact with other people. And it really allows us then to strengthen those relationships, to own our part, but then also recognize where there might be a barrier with another person. So yeah, I would encourage you to check that one out. I think maybe you've come in contact with that tool before, but for your listeners, the influence model is just a great place to start.
Yeah, I think I have come in contact with that tool, and there are so many axioms and tools that GiANT has adopted and used and created that I still find valuable to this day. So I would agree with you in encouraging our listeners to check all those tools out. And like you said, we'll be sure to tell them where they can find all of GiANT's resources. So one of the questions I had in terms of your work with GiANT and just knowing you for so long, I feel like I kind of have an idea of what the answer will be, but I was curious if you could just share for our listeners, why are you so passionate about the work you are doing and what compels you to do it?
Yeah, I think there comes a time when all of us, have to ask the question, what's my purpose uniquely? And I lived a long time and a lot of years just responding to the needs in front of me. So my background is in education and coaching. And then, as you mentioned, my husband and I early on planted a church, and then I was involved in ministry. He's now at a much larger church, and I had roles there. And I feel like a lot of my life through my 20s and 30s was a response. And I'm not complaining about it. It was great. I learned a lot of skills and, did some meaningful work for sure. But I got to a place where it was actually right around the time I turned 40. dating myself. And I had to really ask, what am I passionate about? Where do I see just needs that my skill set or my heart, my wiring, and the experience that I've had, where can that really match up? And when I did some it was really, to use lack of a better term, some soul searching, I realized that my biggest discontent with the world and the breakdown of it really lied with leadership and bad leadership. If people were leading in an unhealthy way within an organization, well, the ripple effect downward to all of their employees is really toxic. And then what happens? Those employees, because they spend 8, 9, 10 hours at work, bring that frustration, that stress home. And so then it affects the family dynamics. And if people aren't self-aware, if they're not able to know themselves, to really lead themselves and start there so that they can lead their team effectively and bring out the best, create an empowering culture for their team and then their entire organization, there's just such catastrophic effects. And genuinely, leadership is a privilege. It's a responsibility because it comes with a lot of power. And you can have a power to really create an incredible experience for the people that you're leading, or you can make their lives miserable. And I think when I began to see that and recognize that, it wasn't because we have all these malicious people who just want to be bad leaders and want to create toxic environments. When I began to see that it wasn't this, intentional bad leadership vendetta that was existing in the world, but actually leaders who just weren't self-aware enough or just didn't have the skill set or tools to actually change, I began to really think about, what can I do to be part of that solution? And then GiANT entered into our world, and I just saw the skills, the resources, the heart behind the consultants and the coaches in that company that were making a difference simply because they were willing to hold a mirror up to these leaders and say, we all have tendencies. We all have tendencies, and we need to understand those because some of our tendencies and the things that are uniquely wired into us are strengths, and they're going to bring health to your culture. But then we all have broccoli in our teeth. We all have tendencies that just undermine our influence, that really, if we're being accidental in our approach to leadership, are going to make other people's lives miserable. And so we as leaders need to own those things and begin to work on ourselves so that we can then influence culture, create healthy dynamics for everybody to thrive in, and become leaders that are, like I said before, worth following, not just leaders that your employees or your followers have to comply with. And when I began to recognize how strong that just that burden was to help leaders really thrive in their leadership, to be healthy, to leave a legacy, not just awake. A lot of leaders leave awake, and it's very painful because leadership's hard and it costs a lot. There's a lot of leaders out there that have a lot of weight and pressure on them, and they're misunderstood and they're lonely because they don't know who they can trust. And I think when you have the privilege, and I've gotten the privilege to walk alongside those leaders and help them understand themselves and then give them tools to change their reality, change the dynamics, change the way that people are experiencing them, gosh, there's nothing better. So I know that was a little long-winded, but that's really why I love what I get to do. It's something that when I wake up in the morning, I can't wait to get up. I am so excited to just be about helping leaders become healthy and then know how to multiply that. And it's been just an incredible adventure so far.
I think it's absolutely incredible that you get to do a job that you are so passionate about and so good at, because there's so many people, there's so many of us that we don't get to be in a role or don't get to do something that showcases our skills or that really drives us to get out of bed in the morning. So I'm really excited that you get to work for GiANT and you get to put your leadership coaching skills on display for people and get to work with people in that capacity. One thing I was thinking of as you were talking a lot about that know yourself to lead yourself. And that is an axiom from GiANT that I have tried to internalize for myself. I, early on in my leadership and life journey, because of people like you and like Jason and the people at GiANT, realized just the importance of having self-awareness, of being committed to personal growth, and just the whole idea of if I want to lead other people, if I want to have a positive influence, that in some ways I can't give what I don't have, and I need to make sure that I am experiencing how to give grace to myself, or how to love myself, or how to just work on myself and see growth for myself. That's why part of the reason why I'm so passionate about things like going to therapy or doing this podcast where I get to learn from people like yourself, or just taking that growth journey. But why do you think, especially when it comes to leadership, that it is so easy? Because I've experienced this. Why is it so easy to feel lonely, to feel pressure, to feel overburdened, to have a harder time maybe of working on yourself, taking that self-growth journey? Why is it such a struggle for leaders to take this journey of self-growth and self-awareness?
Well, I think leaders have the unique dual role of, first of all, even a CEO or, president of a company, they have a job to do. They have their own task list. They have their own performance goals that they have to reach. They have their own, to use the analogy of climbing a mountain, they've got to keep climbing the mountain. You can't give what you don't possess. So there is a degree of excellence that they need to perform at. And so they bear the burden there. But then they also bear the burden of leadership, of actually bringing the best out of each person that they are overseeing. And so they've got to be sharp on both sides of the equation. And I think that's why sometimes leaders lean in too hard on one side or the other. So they're going to lean so hard on their own performance and become so self-absorbed that they just genuinely don't have time to think about, well, what do I need to do to grow? How am I investing in myself, my own health, my family, my relationships? And so they neglect a big side of them. Or even, how am I going to grow so that I can be an effective leader? Not just accidental in my approach to how I'm bringing up the team, but actually really intentional with it. But on the flip side, there's other leaders who are so consumed with the leadership side of things and leading and setting a great atmosphere for their team that their own performance struggles. And then they really become not as credible anymore because their own performance is going down, even as they're trying to influence others. So I think it's a delicate balance. And leaders really need to be intentional in their approach to their own health, their own journey, their own performance, but then also how they're leading. And that's where, we can't do it alone. You can't lead in a vacuum. You need people who are coaching you, supporting you, giving you the tools for the trade, because without that, it can just be overwhelming. We all have gaps in our ability to do certain things, but other people have strengths where our weaknesses lie. I don't care what type of leader are. You could be the most, impressive, well-experienced leader, but the best leaders actually know that they have room to grow, that they need other people with unique skill sets from their own that can help them in times of crisis like we're experiencing right now. There's a humility, there's a competence and a humility that are kind of coupled together in the best leaders that I know. And I think that's where self-awareness begins, where you can really understand the competence you bring to the table, but then also the gaps in your own skill set, IQ, whatever it is. And then the right people to ask for help in those times. But I think, to answer your question, Corey, it is a struggle. Leadership is, it's not something, honestly, that every person should aspire to, because it takes a lot. Not everybody should aspire to climb to Mount Everest. I believe we all can be leaders. I believe with enough time, effort, and intentionality, we can all, be more effective in our leadership, even if it's just leading ourselves. But leadership is a great weight. It's a great burden, and it's also a privilege. But I do think it takes a great degree of intentionality to be healthy in that. While you're carrying that burden, while you are trying to do your best, you have to have some intentionality and strategy, or you'll burn out. And that's genuinely what I've seen.
Yeah, and my own personal experience, I can really attest to what you're sharing, because I remember right around the time we first met, and then in subsequent years, and maybe it's only been up until recently that I feel I've broken out of this mindset a little bit, but most of my life, especially trying to be a leader and have a positive influence on others, I have realized that my focus has been on proving myself, on proving that competence, on developing that competence. And that's not a bad thing, certainly, to hone your craft and want to develop your skills and want to prove yourself as a good and competent leader. But the positive shift for me, and where I started to feel less alone and less burden, and where it started to feel, it's still definitely a struggle to do this, but where it felt like less of a struggle is when I realized the great need I had to rely on the community around me, to rely on other people, that I don't have to be perfect as a leader, that I can screw up and make mistakes. And as long as I have people around me that are there to help me and there to walk me through that it'll be okay in the end. And I think that's where I see a lot of leaders, similar to what you shared, where it becomes such a struggle, is I don't think anyone has malicious intent. No one wakes up and says, I want to create a toxic environment for the people that I'm leading. They just feel insecure or alone or are struggling and feel all that pressure and weight and that desire to want to prove themselves, which is perfectly normal, but maybe don't have places where they can turn or people they can lean on. And that's where I feel like I've been very lucky over the years, is to have people like yourself that I can turn to and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I'm going through this, or I'm experiencing this. And similarly, I think the people that you're coaching are very lucky to have that opportunity. The people that work with GiANT are lucky to have that resource as well. And we talk about struggle with leadership, and I want to talk about breakthrough. As someone who's been on the receiving end of your coaching skills, as we've gone over, and as we alluded to earlier in our conversation, as someone who is going through a lot of angst and a lot of personal struggle, perhaps in my college years and shortly thereafter, I can really appreciate how exciting it is to see the person you've come alongside finally experience some personal breakthrough. Can you describe the feeling when someone you're coaching experiences that victory, has that breakthrough?
There's genuinely nothing better. It is, I tend to see who people are, like I mentioned. Like, I can forecast who they're going to be, how they'll finish that race. And I see it way in advance. I think that's what gives me patience for people as a coach, because I know who they are. I can kind of see that end product. And so when they actually reach it and they experience or just genuinely own what I've already seen in them, but they believe it in themselves and they're acting on that out of confidence and strength, it is one of the most thrilling things, because you really get to see a person become who they're meant to be. You see that freedom wash over them and joy. And it is so exciting. It really is. It makes it all that struggle and all those, conversations and the patience and just the baby steps. Genuinely, a lot of times it's just taking the right step next and just having the confidence to just keep going step by step into that health, into that freedom, into that success. That if a person is willing to just keep stepping, keep taking that next right step, keep staying present, staying focused, having the discipline to do all those small things that nobody sees. I think that's the hard part when I coach people. It's like, it's easy to get up on stage and give a speech at the end when you feel like, yeah, everybody's going to applaud. It's those small acts of discipline that nobody else sees that are so vital to the health and freedom and confidence that people want to pursue, that I feel like I get, kind of a little bird's eye view into. And so when a person actually reaches that breakthrough, it's just so rewarding as a coach to celebrate that with them.
Yeah, I know that for myself, that was a very life-giving realization to me, was that I could spend more time focusing on the stuff behind the scenes that no one saw, that wasn't me speaking or writing or podcasting or whatever. And once I realized that those things matter just as much, if not more, than any of the public stuff I was doing, it became life-giving, because I was able to experience more of a sense of wholeness. And Donald Miller, in one of his books, talks about it. I think his book was Scary Close, where he talks about it, but just that idea of being the same person on the outside that you are on the inside, and not feeling like, because for me, I would often feel like I was torn between two Coreys, the public Corey and the private Corey. What Corey was struggling with internally that he didn't feel comfortable sharing with people, or he didn't feel comfortable kind of going there with people, and the Corey that tried to perform and pretend like everything was great and okay. And once I realized that those two Coreys were actually the same Corey and I could integrate them and merge them, and that the behind the scenes mattered just as much as whatever I was presenting to the public, that's where I really started to experience freedom. Have you seen something similar play out in leaders you've worked with?
Absolutely. All of us want to lean hard into our strengths, the things that we're going to get applause for. But the best and most well-rounded, healthy people, leaders, aside, are people who actually press into the areas where maybe they don't have what we refer to as unconscious competence. Just they could do it with their eyes closed. It's energetic. Like you're somebody who loves to communicate and you're good at it. You speak well, you're, great in public. But then some of those, like you alluded to, those just small, everyday, boring, routine, discipline things, it's not going to be what wakes you up in the morning and gets you excited. But the more, all of us have those. All of us have those things that are just natural to us that we could do all day long. And then certain things that are less appealing, that take a lot more work and intentionality, that tend to be draining. We use the analogy of, if you're right-handed, you could write your name all day long with your right hand. It wouldn't cost you any energy, any thought. You switch that hand and you try to write with your left hand, and all of a sudden your brain has to engage. You have to think about it. It's draining. If you had to do that all day long, it would be difficult. So, a lot of people just lean into their strengths, to what feels natural, and then they come away not feeling very, like you said, holistic. But when we press into our weaknesses and we actually develop some discipline, and that's where coaching comes in. You need somebody to hold you accountable a little bit, to give you some goals, to give you exercises, to work on those things that don't come naturally. But once you begin to gain some strength there, man, you just feel like a whole person. And it allows you then to gain more influence, to have credibility with people who are different than you. And you just genuinely do. It allows you to live as a healthier person and be more productive as a result.
I've experienced my fair share of failure just as a person and as a leader. When you're working with leaders and they find themselves in a time of experiencing failure, whether it's at home or with the organization they're working with, how do you coach a leader through that struggle and through that failure? How do you help them get to the other side of it?
One of the most important lessons of my life I learned on the ski slopes. I ski instructor long time ago. I was trying to master how to do moguls, those bumps on the hills that kind of have to have some skill to go down. And I was falling miserably and hating that day. And picked me up and he said, "Hey, if you're not falling, you're not learning. So it's okay. Fall all you want, because you're figuring out what not to do. Learn those lessons and you're going to get this." And he was right. Over time, with lots of falls, lots of bumps and bruises, I finally learned how to ski well. And I think it's the same with life and leadership. If you always take the safe track and you don't try challenging things, you won't have failures. You'll have lots of success. The problem is you won't grow. You will not become somebody who's sharper, has more skills, has more confidence in areas that you didn't before. So failure really is a necessary part of growth. Now, obviously it's a good idea to minimize the casualties with our failures. I love doing pilot projects, little things that give you opportunities to fail with not a whole lot of consequence. But then there's times where we do have massive casualties or failures just as a result of, life in general, or sometimes our inexperience or biting off more than we can chew. I think it's really important that we come to those with a learning mindset, not as a, embarrass, shame, guilt mindset, but to just really take some time and say, what did I learn from this? What's the lesson here? What do I need to do different? Why did I fail? We have a tool, the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool, and it really looks at what was the reality, what was the consequence, what was my pattern and action, and what are my tendencies that actually caused the reality of failure in this instance. And when we actually take the time to process through those things and look at it kind of from an objective standpoint, and sometimes it's helpful to have another person look at it. we can gain such valuable insights about ourselves and then course correct the next time we're in that situation. I do something called a curbside review. Jeremy Kubicek, our co-founder, he kind of taught it to me. If I just presented a workshop, if I did, basically like a proposal meeting, or if I did a keynote, I always get back into my car, do a curbside review. And I say, what went well? What was the tendency that produced a good reality, Suzi? What was it that you did well? And I give myself a little pat on the back. But then I say, what could have been better? What could you have done differently? And then I grow in those. Even if it's a small thing, it gives me the insight and feedback and data to actually continue to grow and develop, and then to take some action on that. And I think we can do the same with our failures so that it's not a waste. It's not just something we beat ourselves up over, but we learn from.
Yeah, remembering all of those things is what helps me take solace when things aren't going the way I planned or the way I wanted them to. And it always makes me think of that scene in The Dark Knight where Bruce Wayne falls down the well, or he falls down the elevator shaft, and Alfred is like, why do we fall, Master Bruce? So we can learn how to pick ourselves up. And that's kind of the point, is failure. I think it was Coach John Wooden, the very famous coach, who said failure is not fatal, but failure to change can be. And I think that's an important lesson to remember. Since I'm quoting things, have you ever seen the movie What About Bob?
Yes, I love that movie.
Yes, and
so good.
It's a great movie. I love it because I always think of I want to be like Bob, and not Bob in the crazy stalker kind of way where he takes over.
He had some great tips for quarantine. I mean, his personal hygiene and social distancing. He actually is serving as a model for all of us now. So I think we should all rewatch that movie and just emulate how he lived. We'll stay healthy.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. I didn't even think about that part. You're 100% right. So be like Bob when it comes to quarantine. But I just think about how he was always saying baby steps to the door, baby steps down the stairs, baby. And it just makes me think of everything you were saying. Take it one step at a time. And I've found that so helpful because life can get overwhelming, and the leadership journey and those struggles can feel overwhelming, but taking it one step at a time can really make a difference. I'm just curious, because you've been with GiANT for 2 years now, a little over 2 years. What is something you've learned in your time with GiANT? It can be something about leadership, it can be in general, but what's something that you feel you've learned? What's a big takeaway that you didn't maybe conceptualize or have internalized before you started working with GiANT?
I think there's a lot of lessons I've learned. I've learned so many. I feel privileged because I feel like every day I get to work with some of the healthiest leaders. Our whole company is about creating healthy leadership. And so when I get to interact with the consultants who are doing this, it's just been such an incredible gift to me. But I think overall, the biggest lesson I've learned is that you have to be yourself when it comes to leadership. The way I lead uniquely is going to be different than the way you lead, Corey. And it's so vital for me to lead out of my strengths instead of trying to be someone else. And so, as I was building my practice, I had to stop and think, how should I lead this? What's going to set me up for not just success, but actually enjoying what I'm doing? And so for me, quality is absolutely paramount. It is, the thing. I knew if I took on way too many clients originally, I wouldn't be able to serve them with the kind of standard that I hold myself to. And so my mantra really for the first year was quality over quantity. And that was unique to me. Now there's other GiANT consultants who took a completely different and have throughout their careers taken a different track of business development. But for me, I knew I was going to take on just a few clients initially and serve them with such a high standard that they were going to get my best. And then the quantity, the referrals would come from that. And so I think it's really important, no matter what business you're in, no matter what, position or role you're in, that you really take the time and do the hard yards to know yourself, to not compare yourself to other people, to not compare your season to their season, but to really lead out of your own strengths. Because I feel like as a coach, as a mentor, I have to go first. I'm not going to be a great Sherpa for other people if I'm not leading myself well, if I'm not a healthy leader. And so it's vital for me every day to really look at myself in the mirror and ask myself, am I healthy? What do I need to do to adjust? Am I being accidental in my relationships or in my approach to my business or with my clients? Or am I being intentional and strategic? Are they getting my best? And so I think overall, that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned. I've had to learn how to be myself and really bring that 100% of the time, not try to be somebody else.
Why is it so easy for us to compare ourselves to other people?
I think we're just built to do it. It's human nature. Whether we know it or not, a lot of us walk around thinking that everybody's just like us, that we're all wired the same, even though there's a lot of science and research that show that we're not. And, honestly, it's a lot of what GiANT teaches. We help leaders understand their personalities, their wiring, so that they aren't tempted to compare, so that they actually know, we use a platform called the 5 Voices. And so my voice is a creative. I know you have connector and pioneer, a pioneer voice order. And so when I'm tempted to compare myself with someone, it at least gives me that lens to say, wait a minute, like there's the guardian voice. And those voices are so great with systems, resources, details, numbers. And so if one of my best friends is a guardian voice and she is kick butt. I mean, she doesn't miss a thing. She's on time, on budget, always productive, doing a billion things every single day. And if I look at her, I'm tempted to feel like such a slacker, But when I begin to realize her strength is so different than mine, and when I am able to rest in my own strengths, which have a lot more to do with ideas and creativity and future vision and, coming alongside people, it's going to look very different if she and I are both healthy versions of ourselves. But there's always that temptation to compare. And I think that's where knowing yourself, to lead yourself, allows us then to just recognize when we're comparing and then actually take a different route and say, you know what? I am so thankful that she has those strengths. I could work, my entire life and never be as necessarily productive in the day-to-day minutia type things as, my friend who's a guardian voice. And yet I have to be confident in what I bring to the table. And I think the most self-aware, healthy leaders, they learn that lesson. And while that temptation to compare ourselves to other people in other, seasons of their life, they're always there. We have to be careful to not do that. And that just takes an intentional lens of self-awareness.
Yeah, you keep reiterating about playing into your strengths as a leader and as a person. And I found that so important for myself because I am someone that is constantly comparing myself to other people. And I found, mostly through therapy and things like leadership coaching and being in the church and all that, that when I'm comparing myself to other people, and I'll personalize this because I can't speak to what motivates other people, but I typically compare myself when I'm either feeling really insecure, so I want to feel like I'm better than someone else and kind of validate and justify myself, or if I'm feeling really insecure, the flip side of that coin is comparing myself to someone I think is better than me, and I'm always doing this constant measurement system, and I found that it's a really unhealthy way to be, and the times where I felt just more freedom and more wholeness and more health for myself personally is when I don't put that same kind of energy into comparing. I might notice or I might compare here and there, but I'm focused on what I bring to the table, what my strengths are. This podcast is a great example of that because for so long I compared myself to, I'll never be as good as them, or I could do that better than them, or all this energy going every which way, but internally. And when I finally realized it's not about any of that, it's about stepping out and doing this because I believe in it, because I know it's one of my strengths, I found much more freedom and feel much less compelled to compare myself. And I love that you coach leaders in terms of that, just helping them to do less of that comparison and more focus on what their identity and what their strengths are. Because I am a strong believer, as I know you are, that we can really help each other out in a communal kind of way. And we're seeing it with this current pandemic and this current crisis. People, I think, as a whole, are doing a lot less comparison and a lot more just celebrating of one another and celebrating strengths and how people are helping each other. And that's the kind of stuff that I dream about and that I'm passionate about. And a big reason I started getting involved with the Laundry Project is seeing where we could bridge the gaps that naturally exist between us as people, bridge the divides, and really begin to figure out how can we come together and be something greater as a whole than we are separately. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that. In terms of the lessons you've learned with working for GiANT and being a part of a church plant and all the different contexts you've been in, and I should say, I know that GiANT works with leaders across a variety of industries, but I'm just curious, what kind of overlap have you seen working with leaders as a part of GiANT and working with leaders in more of a church-specific context?
That's a good question, Corey. Leadership is leadership no matter where it shows up. If you're a stay-at-home mom, all those stay-at-home moms now, well, actually every mom in America is getting a dose of what it's like to be a stay-at-home mom. You've got to have great leadership. You've got to have intentionality. If you're leading in the church, I honestly think recently I started a Sherpa level group for not-for-profit leaders. I feel like leaders in the church and leaders in the not-for-profit world really bear a big burden of leadership, because unlike those in the marketplace, they don't always have a paycheck to give to their followers. There's not that follow me or else type mentality. Leaders in the church really have to be leaders worth following. They have to do the hard yards to really be influential and to be healthy. It can be a really high burden that they bear. And so I think, leadership is the same no matter where you are. And at the same time, there's different challenges and hurdles to overcome, whether you're in the church or in the marketplace. I do think there is a unique burden in church leadership simply because their product is people. The goal of the church is really to come alongside people, to care for them, to equip them, to give them hope, and really help them understand what life's all about. It's not necessarily an economic profitable product. And so there is a different burden when it comes to leadership that I think church leaders bear, because at the end of the day, their job is never done. You don't close up shop. And so there's always needs there. There's always burdens. They have to be extremely intentional with boundaries and really making sure they set themselves up for health, or they can burn out pretty quick. And I think we see that in the church. We see that with not-for-profit leaders. They have huge hearts, and they want to serve and give, but without the appropriate boundaries and intentionality to take care of themselves and their own health, their team suffers, and their followers end up suffering.
That's really great feedback in terms of the overlap that's there, because you're right. It's so much of leadership is the same, but there are kind of different burdens depending on the industry or the sector that you're in. And I really appreciate that insight. We're gonna wrap it up here shortly, but I want to talk about fear for just 1 second. Pretend you're sitting down with someone and they are expressing maybe the same kinds of fear and insecurity and self-doubt that I expressed very early on as a college student, but they're just expressing that about their abilities to create, to lead, or to have a positive influence on others. What do you say to a person like that? What do you say to someone that has a heart or a passion or some tools and skills, but just is really struggling to take the next step, create the thing they want to create, or lead the thing they want to lead?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if they were sitting across from me and sharing all that, I would say thank you. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for being vulnerable, because that's the first step. So many people live with hidden fears, hidden insecurities. They want everybody to think they're this confident, competent person. But the truth is, we all have fears. We all have insecurities. We all have vulnerabilities. And it is such an important first step to acknowledge them. So I would say thank you. And then I would spend some time really helping them understand who they are. I think that is so important, that a person can understand the strength that they have. And we all have them. I don't care who you are. All of us have strength and gifts and skills and knowledge and experience that is ours to share with the world in whatever capacity we get to. And I think it's really important that we encourage people to recognize that, to not be, apathetic when it comes to what their responsibility is based on who they are and the journey they've been through and the skills they have to bring to the table. So it would help them really understand who they are and the strengths they possess right now, even in that time of weakness or fear, that they do have things that are within their control, that they can share, they can give, they can do. And I would help them then to identify, where is this fear coming from? What are the lies that you're believing about yourself? Or maybe the fear is a little bit well-founded. We all have areas we need to grow in. Maybe there's a passion or something that's on our heart to do, but we know that we're not equipped for it. When we begin to actually identify, where am I seeing that gap? What is that fear driven by? Sometimes we can actually do things to equip ourselves, and then that fear is removed because we now have the tools, the skill, the people to help us actually overcome whatever it was that we were afraid of. I think, and I don't know if you follow Tim Ferriss at all, or his blog or his podcast. He's a really great leader. He struggled with depression and suicidal tendencies for a long time. But he has a really great exercise a friend of mine just shared with me. It's called fear setting. And it is such a great strategy. I've been using it now with clients for a while because it is, we all like to set goals. What's your goal and how are you going to get there? He takes a different approach. And there's a 13-minute YouTube video I'll share with you, Corey, if you want to share it. But he does fear setting. And so he says, what is that fear? So what if I fill in the blanks? What if I start something that, I feel called to do? You list 20 things that could go wrong. What are the implications? What are the things that could go wrong? Where are all those what ifs? Put them down on paper, get them out of your head. And then you look at, how could I prevent those horrible things from happening? So you strategize around it. What's the prevention? And then thirdly, if those horrible fears come into fruition, how would I repair that? How would I repair the damage? So when you go through the process of actually taking the fear out of your own mind and imagination, and you put it down on paper, and you actually plan, okay, well, what if that does happen? What's the worst thing that could actually result? And then how would I repair that? It gives your brain something proactive and positive to actually do with those fears, as opposed to just letting them be the paralyzing agent that keeps us up in the middle of the night, that makes us stay stuck in our tracks. And I really do think it looks at the cost of not doing something. Like, what will it cost me if I don't take action? What's going to be the greater cost if I fail to do this, if I don't? And sometimes just thinking through it that way helps. And there's, speaking of quotes, one of my favorite quotes, a brilliant woman named Jill Briscoe. She's in her 80s now, but she lived as just a fearless, bold missionary, affected so many lives. And I got to be at a leadership retreat that she was at. And she just basically said, sometimes you just do it afraid. Sometimes you're not going to feel like the brave, conquering warrior when you have to step up to the plate, when you have to go into that arena. Sometimes you just do it afraid. Those words have guided me and given me so much confidence, because we make it to the other side. But sometimes it's with fear and trembling. You step up and say yes, and you take that leap that gets us to the other side.
Yeah, I love all of that. I personally, and I've shared this a little bit in a previous episode, I am someone who, as you know, I've struggled at some points a great deal with depression or anxiety over the course of my life. And through, again, just being in therapy and having coaching and different things and tools and resources to help me understand myself better, I've realized that a big part of it, like you said, is holding those narratives constantly in my head, holding them to be true, treating them as the truth, and what a great exercise to find ways to identify what those narratives are, get them out of your head, really explore them. And like you said, it's not always going to feel, every time I go to record this podcast, I don't always feel great or confident about it. And sometimes it's just stepping out while you are afraid and just doing it anyway. So I think all of that's incredible. And I keep telling myself that these conversations are going to be like 40 minutes max, but I keep bringing on great people like yourself and really enjoying the conversations. So I just probably need to recalibrate in my head the length of time this podcast is always going to be. So thank you so much for giving your time and chatting with me today. But before I let you go, how can we find out more about you, more about GiANT and all the work you're doing? What are the resources? Where do we go on social media? What's the website? All that stuff.
Well, you can definitely follow me on LinkedIn, just Suzi Lantz, and I have tons of resources and great links to GiANT's platform. If you want to try out GiANT TV, which is really like the Netflix or Peloton of leadership, it gives you some customized pathways to grow and to learn your skills. It's just giant.tv/Suzi, SUZI, Lantz, LANTZ. And that gives you and your listeners 30 days of a free trial to just test it out. And I really encourage you to do that. There are, again, tons of resources for remote working. We have a new series called Quarantined. So if any of your listeners are finding themselves working from home and trying to get the best out of themselves and their team, it's a really neat resource. But I would say those are the best places to start.
Yeah, for sure. And you said Peloton, and I couldn't help but laugh at the thought of you and GiANT filming a Peloton-like commercial using the GiANT resources. So that's
That'd
great.
Be kind of fun.
Yeah, but seriously, everyone should go check out those resources. We'll link to them in the show notes, and we'll put it out there when we promote the episode. But I've used those resources. They are incredibly valuable and incredibly helpful, and I definitely encourage you to go check all of that out and follow along with all the great work that Suzi and GiANT are doing. And Suzi, I just want to thank you one last time so much for coming on the Easter Pod. Selfishly, it's great to be able to catch up and chat, and I always get a lot out of our conversations, but I'm very confident that anyone listening to this is going to be very encouraged by the wisdom you had to share and by your experiences as well. So again, thank you.
Thanks for having me, Corey. It's been a privilege.